This video is not about The Last of Us Part 2. This video is about how we talk about The Last of Us Part 2. So since we're doing a new semi-regular series on this channel, I thought I'd change up the visuals slightly. Nah, that looks weird. Maybe something a bit more feminine? Yeah, there we go. So the discourse around The Last of Us Part 2 has become completely toxic. Time to get out the hazmat suit. We are diving right in, kids. The question I want to ask is The Last of Us 2 good representation? But even that's kind of a multi-part question. The beginning is as good a place to start, I guess. The Last of Us released in 2013 to massive critical acclaim. The developer Naughty Dog previously developed goofy platformers, as well as starting a subgenre I'm calling the Indiana Jones-like with the Uncharted series. The Last of Us itself was noteworthy at the time for being hailed as a narrative achievement in gaming, but looking back on games in that era we thought were pushing the medium forward, I seriously struggle to find one that I remember actually holding up to modern scrutiny. I mean, seriously, y'all remember BioShock Infinite? Spec Ops The Line? GTA 5? Far Cry 3? Of course you don't. The thing about The Last of Us that makes it stick out for me, other than being all over my fucking social media feed for time eternal since the leaks dropped in the beginning of May, is that it's the one super artsy AAA game that tries to have queer representation. Yeah, I know Mass Effect did it, but don't get me fucking started on Mass Effect because we will be here for hours and you will want to crucify me. Anyway. Yeah, the first game had basically nothing LGBT in it as far as I could tell. It wasn't until the DLC for the original game, Left Behind, came out that we learned that Ellie is a lesbian. In The Last of Us Part 2, we learn that Ellie has a girlfriend, and we meet another character named Lev, who is a trans man. Alright, awesome, solid representation we can really get our teeth into, right? The problem I'm running into with this game, however, is that it doesn't feel like the characters are there for a reason. Lev especially is a case where I feel like the designers, if they cared, would have done so much more with the idea of a trans character living in a post-apocalyptic world. Instead, it seems like they just kind of use him to cozy the bad guys as evil. This is nothing new in media. The kick the dog moment from villains to make sure that they're evil goes back a long way. Problem is that if you're using the abuse of a minority group as shorthand for your bad guy being bad, that feels both lazy and crappy to the group that you should be trying to represent. On the other hand, it seems like Ellie being a lesbian doesn't enter into the plot at all. Every summary I've read describes these events happening and it all feels very neutral, like Ellie could have been straight and the events would have happened the same. Even so, it feels like the game is falling into a tired lesbian trope, which is to say that it turns Ellie effectively into a vengeful man, which then allows her to commit violence and gives her permission to be the protagonist of a video game. This is a well-worn trope for female characters, bringing the female protagonist into a masculine space and coding her as a man, which then allows her to commit violence and gives her permission to star as the action hero. A classic example is the Terminator movies, which also fall into the trope of giving its female lead no agency in the plot outside of her being a vessel for John Connor, and then committing violence in the name of her son. This is exacerbated further by the actually pretty progressive, on other ways, Dark Fate, but I actually kind of enjoyed that. This video is about video games. Something more recent off the top of my head is the character of Bombshell in Ion Fury, showing my love for boomer shooters, where the game is a fairly explicit comparison between itself and Duke Nukem 3D, which to me feels like an Indiana Jones to Lara Croft kind of progression, where the novelty is making a game with a female protagonist and not actually aiming at any sort of progressive message. We are getting way off track though. This is supposed to be a Last of Us video. Another aspect of the backlash from this game that I'm seeing is the portrayal of the character Abby. There was some speculation that she's supposed to be a trans woman, the evidence being that she's fairly muscular, which is a rare body type for female characters in video games. The fact that it seems like people are outraged by the very presence of a female character who is coded masculine in this way, in my mind, makes this character looks like a masculine woman and therefore must be trans, a dead giveaway for how the gaming public not only thinks about trans people in general, but how it feels about women. They seem to think that Street Fighter levels of unrealistic standards for women is the norm, and a game trying to be realistic and grounded and to pick a female character that isn't what is conventionally depicted in video games must be the result of something else. The only time someone could be called a woman if she looks this mannish is if she's trans, and therefore Abby must be trans, and that's why she looks like a man to them, which is a whole other level of transphobia that I hope I really don't need to debunk. It also feels like the game is making Ellie a lesbian just as an aid for men to enjoy playing her. The thought process being that a man won't buy the game that isn't sufficiently masculine, and turning the protagonist into a lesbian that is given the role of a man in the game and a relationship to allow the men playing the game to empathize with her, and that a straight character would have made it harder because a man cannot care about the love interest of a straight female character, or at least that seems to be the misguided logic at play. Why am I even talking about this if this is a game that I don't really care about and I have no take into whether or not it does well? To give a little peek behind the curtain, I'm writing the script at way too fucking late in the evening on July 1st after watching the Zero Punctuation review of the game. This is the part that hit me.
And we might as well tack on 4 being a member of a minority, just because I've already given up hope for this video's comments section.
And it hit me because he's right. Just being LGBT doesn't make these characters interesting. Having LGBT characters in prominent roles doesn't make this game worth talking about. And yes, I understand the irony of making an entire video about a game just to say that it's not worth talking about, but that's just kind of the world that we live in, guys. This game is not important for queer people just because it has queer characters in it. What would make games important for queer people going forward is an attention to the way that queerness exists in these games, while not using it as a bad tropey aid to give the presumably mostly white male player base an easy in to identifying with Ellie. So where am I going with all this? Well, I feel like The Last of Us having queer characters actually hurts the game and the continuing discourse around queer people in games. Here's the problem. As I outlined above, I don't think The Last of Us Part 2 was an example of positive LGBT representation in video games. What I think The Last of Us Part 2 is, however, is a game that's entirely made to be a talking point. To make another Zero Punctuation reference, it feels like the video game equivalent of Oscar bait. A game that tries so hard to be topical and real and relevant and to invite discussion and introspection about life and the human condition, and it will all be as vapid, worthless, and ultimately forgotten as Green Book was, because that's all any of this can be. Oscar bait movies exist for awards clout as marketing. The Last of Us 2 does the same thing, albeit in a more roundabout way. The zeitgeist surrounding this game is an air of smug self-satisfaction that the gaming industry has finally produced art. No one tell Neil Druckmann about Limbo, or Grim Fandango, or Fallout 2, or Firewatch, or Dark Souls. Seriously though, I can't even begin to unpack the Twitter drama that's done nothing but poison the discourse surrounding the game. The Last of Us Part 2 is a relic from a past era. It's like if a AAA game from 2013 was dropped suddenly in the middle of 2020 with no explanation. The games industry has moved on. Games like The Witcher 3 have set a new, higher standard for what mature AAA games look like, with all the depth of writing and character and world design that games in the past had, but also blending in mechanics and gameplay. I think one of the reasons it's tough to really tear down and critique this game is that it feels like it should be so important, despite the fact that every edge in it is sanded down for the sake of making it palatable to a mainstream cis white male audience who liked the first game. And it is impossible to critique the game without also discussing the discourse surrounding it. Putting a lesbian protagonist in there feels more like they're throwing up a defense. Like, our game has a queer person, you can't dislike it. And then when that feeling starts coming up, I have 3 questions for Naughty Dog and for Neil Druckmann specifically. Did you expect LGBT people to buy your game just because it has queer characters in it? Did you expect internet critics like me to praise your game because it has queer characters in it? And what does that say about the state of the games industry? Hey, so I don't usually talk at the end of these things, but I had a lot of fun putting this video together. I think it's really important to talk about queer characters in games, especially because there are so few. Leave a comment down below if you can think of a game that has queer representation in it, and then I'll take a look and it'll probably become a video topic. Also, feel free to like the video if you liked it, drop a subscribe, and share the video with people who want to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 with you. You know, helping this video get as many eyeballs on it as possible is really helpful for me. I don't actually monetize these yet. Maybe I'll start a Patreon eventually. But yeah, that's all my time, and I will see y'all next time.